Hey kids, let's talk about the good old days growing up in Idaho. Hello everyone, welcome to another episode of Growing Up in Idaho, talking about the good old days. Today's show comes from the life history of Harry Hicks, my grandfather. Harry was born in 1916 in Camas, Idaho on the 14th of January. A local cowboy named Bill Hamilton rode his horse and pulled a cowhide slip that a midwife named Granny Meltzer rode on through the night to get to Great-Grandma's side and deliver the baby. Great-Grandma was born in a gypsy camp at the top of the Camas Valley in the late 1800s and was later adopted into the Walker clan in Camas. The Walkers were settlers who arrived in the valley from Polk, Missouri, around the turn of the century. The Camas Valley was nicknamed Little Missouri because of all the Missourians that settled there. Great-great-grandpa Robert Hicks was the third settler in the Camas Prairie, located in Central Idaho. He migrated to Idaho from Kansas shortly after the ending of the Civil War. His father-in-law fought on the side of the Confederacy and died as a result of being held captive in a Union prison. Grandpa Robert and his wife Annie wanted a better life and heard about the opportunities in the West. Eventually, some of the family, including my great-grandpa, migrated north and ended up in Camas and later Salmon. This story is about my grandpa Harry Hicks's family trip from Camas back down to the Camas Prairie to visit relatives. He was about 8 years old at the time. This story took place during hard times, but those good Idaho people were kind and friendly to each other and were of a mindset to help each other out. Listen in and hear some good old Idaho history from back in the good old days. About 1924, Dad got a Model T Ford truck with a worm drive Ruxtell gear. Does anyone know what that is? That truck would go up the steepest of hills with those hard rubber tires on the rear. It had bus seats running along both sides of the bed with a roof overhead. About this time, we decided to take a trip down to Camas Prairie to visit as many of our Hicks family as we could. To get ready for our trip, we took several little 15-gallon barrels and went up to Redfish Lake to catch some of those red fish. Not the red suckers you see them catching today in 1974. We caught 2 or 3 barrels full in about 2 hours. We carried them to camp and Mother packed them in salt while Dad gutted them. We had just gotten everything packed up and were ready to leave when a man dressed like the engineers at Yellow Jacket came along. That's to say, he was dressed in a heavy button-down shirt, heavy pants with high leather boots. He said he was a game warden and explained his duties about this game situation, but none of us had ever heard of a game warden and knew nothing about what he said. Dad told him that stuff just wouldn't work and they had the wrong idea. Dad said there was going to be a lot of wardens shot and hid out in the bushes. Nevertheless, he told Dad not to be fishing like that. Dad said he would not until he found out for himself. So as we loaded up and drove on down the road, we saw other campers with wagons and teams. Dad told them what that warden fellow had said, and they started to leave too. They commented that they always came up to the lake and got barrels of salted down fish for winter, and they had their wagons filled with barrels of fish and sacks of salt. I remember one lady began to cry and cuss the government. The day we headed to Camas Prairie, we went back on over to Arco and picked up Mrs. Horn, the mother of Uncle Ralph Silvers, who was married to Aunt Ida, Dad's older sister. She was to go with us down to Camas Prairie, where my granddad Robert L. Hicks was the third settler on the prairie. When you went anywhere in an old Model T Ford, you just had to be prepared for the long haul. We packed bedding, lanterns, a tent, plenty of food, in addition to those barrels of red fish, as a treat for those family folks where we would be staying. Us young ones was to ride in the back of the truck along with Mrs. Horn and all the provisions. We had 2 or 3 dozen oranges, and old Lady Horn made us save them to eat while we crossed the lava desert. We didn't get up the mountain pass the first day because the long pull up to the foothills burned out the clutch, low gear. We pulled off beside the road and camped early, and Dad put a new lining on the clutch. He also had to do this once more on that trip. He had no lining this time, though, so he used his leather belt. Also, the clutch would get so hot, Dad would turn around and, using the middle pedal, which was reverse, he backed up the hills for a while to let the clutch cool off. Those who remember will know how you had to drive those old Model Ts. You will remember things like the 3 coils setting in a box on the dashboard, and how they would go clickety-clacking as the electric current went through them to spark and keep the motor running. The car's engine ran on a magneto. Each coil was about the size of a brick, and there were 3. If the weather even got a little bit damp, those coils had to be dried out in an oven before they would work again. Just outside of Fairview, as we climbed up on the big plateau on that side of the Camas Prairie, we camped near a ranch ran by an old lady who had a talking parrot. We stood and listened to him sing Old Black Joe over and over again. Our astonishment seemed to tickle the old woman, who cackled on as much as her parrot. As we went on our way the next day, we were set upon by the worst rainstorm in my recollection. We raced our old Ford for a big frame barn we could see off in the distance. We had to get that pickup out of the rain because we knew it would quit on us as soon as those coils got wet. We made it to the barn, threw open the outside gate, and drove into the corral outside the barn doors. We saw that the huge barn doors were open, and standing inside was a huge, vicious-looking Missouri stud mule, and they are the worst. He was stomping his feet, rearing up and kicking and chomping his teeth like he was telling us that he was not going to give up that dry barn for anyone. Somehow, we managed to drive him out of there with a flurry of rocks, and then we pulled the old Ford in and closed the big barn doors. Mrs. Horn and Mother commenced wringing the water out of everything, while Dad and us kids were more concerned about the mad stud mule. He kept his barrage of mean antics and running up to the barn doors, rearing up and slamming the barn door with his front hooves and biting it with his teeth. Then he would whirl around and kick again with both hind hooves all at once. We figured if the mule kicked down the door, we would be in a very bad, tight spot. So we tore out the mangers and put them and some poles against the door, and then backed the truck up to the door to hold the poles in place. With that, we were a little safer. The mule's anger and beating against the doors went on all night. We crawled under the truck to sleep where we were safer. Nobody got any sleep, as soon the roof began to leak and the water was puddling up everywhere. The next morning for breakfast, we broke out some dry bread and those old standbys, Van Camp's pork and beans. For drinks, we sucked the juice out of those oranges. And all the while, that damn mule was still out for our blood, and Dad was starting to regret making him so mad at us. It was plain that animal was not going to let us get away without a fight. Since that time, I've read outdoor magazine articles about the world's most vicious territorial animals, like lions, rhinos, water buffalo, wild boars, and bears, but I'll lay bets on all I own with a wild stallion or a big stud mule who is the most dangerous when they have malicious intent. Well, it wasn't long before a farmer came by driving a wagon pulled by 2 big black work horses, even bigger than the mule, and he was a big one. In those days, a good neighbor was a beloved member of Adam's race. Perceiving our predicament, he offered to help. He carried a big 1-inch rope on his wagon hitch. Dad and the farmer unhitched the team from the wagon, and bestriding the team with the harness still on, they went into the field to meet the mule. Dad threw a rope around that mule's neck and flipped a half-hitch over his nose, and took his dally around the harness frames, while in Spanish fashion, the farmer reached down and with a flip of the wrist, picked up the mule's hind feet, and in an angry manner, they dallied and jerked that mule off his feet. Then Dad unhooked a tug that was hooked up in the proper place, and took a double half-hitch around that tug. He hauled the mule on the wet grass by the muzzle right out of the gate and down the road a ways. The farmer announced it was his mule and offered to pay Dad for any damages, but Dad quickly declined that offer. The man said he and his ranch hand would be back later to let the mule loose as soon as he had learned to be tolerable. He said he had to do that often to take the meanness out of him. He said he was going to shoot him as soon as he bred some mares. As soon as we got our truck's coils dry and warm, we were on our way. Dad said, "You learned a lesson today, kids. Never forget it. It may be impossible to find good neighbors like that in all your days." Later that day, we stopped in some little town, and Dad pointed to a long building. "There's a hot springs in that building," he said. I immediately ran away to see what a hot springs was. Well, they drove off and left me. When I came out, they were all gone. I was lost. I began to bawl and cry something awful and run around, and it wasn't long till I was really lost. About 3 miles on their way, those two enemies of mine, old Lady Horn and my sister Mildred, told Dad and Mother I wasn't there with them. They finally found out where they lost me, and after a search of the town, they found me. Soon we reached Fairfield, where some of the relatives lived, and spent a few days visiting there. We went to a circus or a carnival in town. I remember seeing a man there that would swallow needles and thread. Then he would pull the string and needles up his throat and back out of his belly. We also saw my first and only Punch and Judy show. After a couple days, we left Camas Prairie and dropped down on the Snake River near King Hill. We crossed the Snake River on that bridge and went up to the ranch on the other side of the river to get a truckload of watermelons. We crossed that bridge in low gear, half afraid that it might not hold the old Model T. As of this date in 1974, that bridge is still standing. That was more than 50 years ago, and it was an old bridge then. We drove about a quarter mile and pulled up to the ranch house. We didn't know these people, but heard they might have some melons. Piling out of the truck, we commenced to get acquainted, and we were greeted as old friends. We met on the same principle as the Indians would greet their friends. "It is very good, my brother, that you have come so far to see us." Every person you would meet in those days was a friend, with no reservations, until you made him an enemy. With no suspicion, they seemed to recognize that. There is a man in whom there is no guile, as Christ said of Nathanael. There was a table out under a tree with plenty of shade and plenty of grass. The farmer guy said, "Come join us." We were about to have a strawberry and cream feast, and we just needed someone to come and help us eat them all up. The berries grow stale and rotten, and the cream sours, if not eaten when ready. My mother, God rest her soul, knew all about the loneliness of a farm wife and the longing to have someone to visit. She said we would all like that very much, and you must let me be of some help. And as the saying goes, I'll speak for my supper, because I can't sing. And while all sat on the chairs and benches and ate berries and rich cream, my mother, true to her word, began to recite poetry, which was very popular in those days. She went through a select 10 or 15 of her shortest poems, like "Still Stands the Schoolhouse," "Skeleton in Armor," "Blue Scarf and Scar," "Bill Mason's Bride," "The Village Blacksmith," and some other great poems. Mother had a photographic memory and recited poetry and whole books from the Bible by memory. One night, on a challenge from Dad, we were to hear her recite from memory Evangeline by Longfellow. It took her hours, from the afternoon well into the evening. Anyway, her recitals seemed to astonish those farm folks very much, and pleased the children immensely. After Mom's poetry, the men began talking. Dad said, "I've been living up at Little Missouri, and them farmers up that way can't raise those good old red watermelons. In fact, they haven't seen a big red melon since they left Missouri. I was thinking about throwing a little hay in the truck and buying about 24 big melons to take back to Little Missouri, just to show them off." "Good idea," said the farmer. "Have a little fun with those boys, eh? Well, I've got 200 or 300 down in the orchard. I raise them to feed the hogs. You telling me the Missourians eat them?" "Yeah, well, the Missourians that settled up the Pacimaroy," said Dad. The farmer gave Dad a funny look, like he didn't know what he was talking about. "Oh, that's a river and valley," Dad explained. So the man sent his kids and me and my sister down to the orchard to gather 24 not-too-ripe melons to take back with us. We stayed the night, and the next morning we all arose to eat breakfast at that same table we had feasted on berries and rich cream the day before. Then Dad and that nice man put some hay in the back of the truck, and Mama carefully packed the melons in the hay. While they were doing that, I sat down and ate a chunk of melon. It was so sweet and good. The farm boy embarrassed me when he said, "Hey, Daddy, look, he's eating some watermelon." I immediately stopped when the whole family began to laugh at me. Before we left, the argument began over money. The man would not take any money and insisted we had done him a favor by taking all those strawberries and all that rich cream and those melons off his hands. And Dad was just as stubborn and insistent for taking something without paying for it. Mother and the farm lady finally settled the argument by giving the boy and girl each a quarter. I remember how proud they were. That was the first money they ever earned. Try as we could not pay any more. Then, with much handshakes, waving, and farewells, and kissing and hugging and tears by the women folks, we drove down to the bridge and carefully crossed over, but not before I had made a pledge to that farm girl that I would come back and marry her some day and take her away to Pacimaroy, the place of many green trees. Thanks for listening. Growing Up in Idaho, the Good Old Days.